Now I swear by the sun god Utah on this very day, and my younger brothers shall be witness of it, in foreign lands where the sons of Sumer are not known, where people do not have the use of paved roads, where they have no access to the written word, that I, the firstborn son, am a fashioner of words, a composer of songs, a composer of words, and that they will recite my songs as heavenly writings, and that they will bow down before my words. These dramatic statements by Shulgi, the second king of Ur, echo from the Sumerian Renaissance period. The Renaissance period in Sumer was, however, short-lived. Kingdoms of Sumeria is the story of these mysterious people and their successors. It is the story of what they achieved, what they preserved, and how each one fell from grace. Before we go there, we must address how the Sumerians actually came into being. Sumerian history is purported to begin around the 5th millennium BC, when a people known as the Ubaid culture established settlements in the region that became known later as Sumer. These settlements gradually developed into cities, becoming the principal Sumerian cities of Adab, Eridu, Isin, Kish, Kolab, Lagash, Lhasa, Nippur, and Ur. At some point, the Ubaid peoples, precursors to the group we call Sumerians, intermingled. They are both mysterious in their own right. They efficiently morphed into one denomination in the 3000 BC era. The Ubaid group are renowned for their serpent-like deities. The site where the unusual artifacts were discovered is called Tel el-Ubaid, although figurines have also been found in Ur and Eridu. The el-Ubaid site has very little left, just a small amount, about half a kilometre in diameter and 2 metres above the ground. It was Harry Reginald Howell whom, in 1919, unearthed male and female figurines. They were found in different postures, and most of the figurines appear to be wearing a helmet and have padding of some kind on the shoulders. Other figurines were found to hold a staff or sceptre, possibly as a symbol of justice and ruling. Each figurine has a different pose, but the strangest of all are the female figurines nurturing babies suckling milk. The child is also represented as a serpent-type creature. The figurines are always presented with long heads, almond-shaped eyes, long tapered faces, and a snake-like nose. What exactly they represent is completely unknown. According to archaeologists, their postures, such as a female figure breastfeeding, do not suggest that they were ritualistic objects. So, what did these snake-like figures represent then? Whatever they were, they appear to have been important to the ancient Ubaid people. We know that the serpent was a major symbol used in many successive cultures to represent a number of gods. The Sumerian god Enki is a prime example, the snake being of huge significance in later adaptations to Sumerian and biblical accounts. Which brings us to the Sumerians. In 3250 BC, another mysterious group came to the cities. They began to intermarry with the native Ubaid people. These people became known as the Sumerians. Interestingly, no one can be sure where the Sumerian homeland is. When we speak in later periods of Sumerian culture, in the era of 3000 BC onwards, we are technically speaking of the fusion of the Ubaid and Sumerian groups. There are claims that they are Semites who moved in from the west, and there are beliefs that they have migrated from northeastern Mesopotamia. The Semite perspective likely stems from the later influx of Amorites. The Amorites were likely the biblical giants of Canaan, which we'll discuss later. There is notably a concerted effort to claim the heritage of the Sumerians. When we look to the northeast, the region of Turkmenistan and Central Asia, particularly the Hindu Kush and Kopet mountains, seem incredibly interesting to say the least. We know the Sumerians had a complete obsession with lapis lazuli. The Epic of Gilgamesh even tells us that the mythological beliefs revolve around the mineral lapis. They believed their gods in lapis lazuli palaces, the sun, moon, and Venus would rise from the lapis palaces to travel the sky and return to the palaces at night. Sumerian art is dominant with the mineral lapis lazuli. This Sumerian commodity has a unique signature only found in one specific place on Earth, the Sari Sang lapis mines, which show extensive mining for 6,000 years. In the standard of Ur shown here, now housed in the British Museum, it demonstrates just how lapis dominated their art. We even get another clue in this object to the clothing they wore. This combed sheepskin attire, unusually unique, is reminiscent of ancient Turkmenistan cultures. We see an individual playing an ancient harp on the standard of Ur, also housed in the British Museum. This beautiful Sumerian harp reconstructed from the standard of Ur imagery with lapis lazuli. From the same archaeological finds, we have the delicate ram in a thicket, a composite of gold and lapis, an artistic concept of combining these two valuable minerals we see spread as far as Egypt. The Ishgar Gate, now housed in the Pergamon Museum, shows the beautiful lapis glazed tiles. It also gives you an idea of the quantity and sheer distance they transported this material. Sumerian gods and early statues always depict blue eyes, a significant feature in their artistic representation, physically and methodologically, as their lapis eyes look to the lapis heavens. Biogeographic research involving haplogroups does indicate some influence from Turkmenistan, but you would expect that if you mined or traded the quantities of lapis there. Here is the other problem. When you look in that region, you find ancient settlements and artifacts similar to the Ubaid culture. Was there an Ubaid influence in Turkmenistan? Gunnar Tape, Anu, and other Neolithic settlements are incredibly similar. These artifacts at Gunnar Tape show a close resemblance to Ubaid art. It really does seem when you go looking for Sumerians, you find the Ubaid culture too. Which brings us to the same problem of when exactly they fused together as one culture. The only thing we do know for sure is the Sumerian language is completely isolate. It is as if they were inserted into Mesopotamia, fully equipped with an amazing, highly evolved skill set. Trade and commerce can provide interesting evidence, but it does not prove origins. It proves how extensive their trade network was. In the centuries that followed, with the immigration of the Sumerians, the country grew rich and powerful. Art and architecture, crafts, religious and ethical thought flourished. The Sumerian language became the prevailing speech of the land. The people here developed a cuneiform script, the system of writing on clay. The script was to become the basic means of written communication throughout the Middle East for a further 2,000 years. The rise of the Sumerian civilization from obscurity to enlightenment is phenomenal. There is no doubt about that. There was no trial and error, no evidence of a slowly evolving civilization. The Sumerian civilization almost sprung into existence overnight. In the space of a relatively small window of time, the leaps and bounds in technological, artistic, spiritual, and architectural achievements are breathtaking. We desperately cling to discover a trigger for this. One particularly bright leader or visionary doesn't do it. There is no evidence for that. No influence from another neighbouring, advanced regional culture either. It is as if the Sumerians were savants from day one. The legacy of the Sumerian savants is highly significant. They were advanced business administrators and used a system of counting based on the unit 60. The sexagesimal system rather than the decimal system, which is based on the unit 10. The sexagesimal system is still used today in computing divisions of time, 60 seconds to a minute, 60 minutes to an hour, a day of 24 hours and a week of 7 days. They based their angles, divisions of 360, multiples of 60. They also created a lunar calendar, attributing more importance on the movements of the moon, unlike the Egyptians who worshipped the sun. We know this from their worship of the lunar god Nana in Akkadian Sin. There is an extensive array of data provided by archaeology and Mesopotamian astronomy. However, the intellectual approach of the Sumerian savants has never been analysed scientifically. Presumably, they observed the motions of the moon before the appearance of writing. The need to record lunations precisely and repeatedly simultaneously gave rise to the invention of time and writing. This was an incredibly important step in abstract thought. The abstract thought didn't stop there. Recently discovered evidence shows they tracked the motion of Jupiter using a precursor to modern calculus, the area under a curve. Babylonian astronomers used simple arithmetic to predict the positions of celestial bodies. They also employed sophisticated geometric methods that foreshadowed the development of calculus. Historians had thought such techniques did not emerge until 14th century Europe. Although the tablets prove Leibniz and Newton merely rediscovered calculus, the revelations didn't stop there. Matthew Ossendriver of Humboldt University in Berlin bases his findings on a re-examination of clay tablets dating from 350 BC to 50 BC. They even contained instructions for constructing a trapezoidal figure. It was assumed unrelated to anything astronomical. Ossendriver studied two other tablets that also prescribed the drawing of a trapezoid, and in these he thought he could make out a reference to Jupiter. The giant planet was an obsession among the Babylonians, who equated this planet with their main god Marduk, the actual patron deity of the city of Babylon. But the Jupiter link was tentative. Retired Assyriologist Hermann Hunger of the University of Vienna visited Ossendriver, bringing photos taken decades ago of an uncatalogued Babylonian tablet from the British Museum that described some of the astronomical computation. Alone in his office a few months later, Ossendriver perused the photos. Images were blurry and the inscriptions slanted, making them hard to read, but he realised the numbers were identical to those in the trapezoid inscriptions he had been scrutinising. By comparing the photos with fragments of other Babylonian texts, he discovered that the computations described the motions of Jupiter. Examining all of the tablets at the British Museum, Ossendriver figured out that the trapezoid calculations were a tool for calculating Jupiter's displacement each day along the ecliptic, the path that the sun appears to trace through the stars. The computations recorded on the tablets covered a period of 60 days, beginning on a day when the giant planet first appeared in the night sky just before dawn. During that interval, Jupiter's motion across the sky appears to slow. Such erratic apparent motion stems from the complex combination of Earth's own orbit around the sun with that of Jupiter. A graph of Jupiter's apparent velocity against time slopes downwards, so that the area under the curve forms the magic trapezoid. The area of the trapezoid in turn gives the distance that Jupiter has moved along the ecliptic during the 60-day period. Calculating the area under a curve to determine a numerical value is a basic operation known as the integral between 2 points in calculus. Discovering that the Babylonians understood this was the real aha moment. Delving into older, purely mathematical Babylonian texts written between 1800 BCE and 1600 BCE, which also described computations with a trapezoid, he realised that the astronomers who made the tablets had gone a step further. To compute the time at which Jupiter would have moved halfway along its elliptic path, the astronomers divided the 60-day trapezoid into 2 smaller ones of equal area. The vertical line dividing the 2 trapezoids marked the halfway time. Because of the different shapes of the trapezoids, it indicated not 30 days, but slightly fewer. The Babylonians had developed abstract mathematical, geometrical ideas about the connection between motion, position and time that are so common to any modern physicist or mathematician. Their presence testified to the revolutionary brilliance of the unknown Mesopotamian scholars who constructed Babylonian mathematical astronomy. After cuneiform died out around 100 AD, Babylonian astronomy was thought to have been virtually forgotten. It was left to French and English philosophers and mathematicians in the late Middle Ages to literally reinvent what the Babylonians had invented, developed and ritually practiced as far back as 1800 BC. Without doubt, learning how the Babylonian astronomers acquired their geometric acumen, their mathematical prowess, their abstract reasoning would tell us something about why human beings do science in the first place. The legacy of Sumerian civilization was completely adopted in its entirety by Babylon. The only thing we can say for sure is that the trail of the savants in this region on the level of Newton goes back to 1800 BC as a minimum. The Sumerian cuneiform writing was a revolution. Every conquering kingdom of Sumeria adopted it. It is even thought to have inspired Egyptians to create their own script. It spread geographically and was to be used by the later Persian Empire, while the technical inventions of the potter's wheel and the wheeled cart appear to have emerged from Sumerian civilization. It is the successive Babylonian astronomers who preserved their mathematics and number system. By the 23rd century BC, the power of the Sumerians had declined to such an extent that they could no longer defend themselves against foreign invasion. The cause of this was the endemic problem that besets most great civilizations: internal disputes, greed and power struggles. So weak had the country become that the Semitic ruler Sargon the Great in the 24th century BC succeeded in conquering the entire country. Sargon founded a new capital called Agade in the far north of Sumer and made it the richest and most powerful city in the then known world. The people of northern Sumer and the conquering invaders eventually interbred, and the people became known as Akkadians. The land of Sumer acquired the composite name Sumer and Akkad. This young civilization was not to flourish, however, and another race of people, the Elamites from modern-day Iran, attacked around 2004 BC, conquering the principal city of Ur. It was in turn sacked and burned, but later rebuilt by the Babylonians. During the next centuries further, bitter intercity struggles for the control of Sumer and Akkad occurred. It was Hammurabi of Babylon became the sole ruler of Sumer and Akkad around 1763 BC. This date technically marks the end of the Sumerian state. Sumerian civilization, however, was adopted in its entirety by Babylon, which brings us back to the Jupiter cuneiform tablet. This wartime of Hammurabi, 1800 BC, was not the time to invent calculus. Like everything else, it was a Sumerian gift to the world, and the successive Babylons simply preserved it. The Sumerians completely disappeared as a people. Their language lived on as a language of culture, while their writing, their business organizations, their scientific knowledge, and their mythology spread westward by the Babylonians and Assyrians. If it were not for the Babylonian record keepers, we may have never known the profound level of mathematics they acquired. There is a major clue to their scientific knowledge and legacy in the base 60 Sumerian number system. The Jupiter calculation tablet even uses a 60-day count. They were obsessed with the unit 60. It was simply embedded in their thought process. Nobody explains professionally why they were calculating the precise position of Jupiter or why they used the base 60 system in the first place. it is waived of a superstition by the very science journals that published the find. Because Jupiter is associated with their god Marduk, this advanced math is regulated to the superstitious astrology and omens department. True, there was no segregation between astrology and astronomy in all ancient cultures. The Babylonian kings likely utilised their astronomers and mathematicians to give omens and divination, at times to demonstrate their power and prestige. Precession of the equinoxes. The motion of the equinoxes along the plane of Earth's orbit must have been known for centuries. It has an incredible link to the base 60 system that is never addressed. In compiling his famous star catalogue, completed in 1029 BC, the Greek astronomer Hipparchus noticed that the positions of the stars were shifted in a systematic way from earlier Babylonian measures. Despite this known fact, the Greeks are still accredited with discovering precession. This indicated that it was not the stars that were moving, but rather the observing platform, Earth. Such a motion is called precession and consists of a cycle wobbling with a period of 25,920 years. This gives the famed 12 zodiacal ages of 2,160 years apiece. The 12 zodiacal ages that make up 25,920 is often referred to as the Great Year. Amazingly, the Great Year is exactly divisible by 60, 432 divisions of 60 to be precise. Each zodiacal age, for example, the age of Aquarius, the age of Pisces, is 2,160 and also exactly divisible by 60, 6 times 6 times 60, or 6 times 360. Simply speaking, if you wanted to choose a number system to deal with calculating precession, 60 is the number one choice. Precession in solar years is a natural base 60 system. If you have 100 cents to a dollar and 100 people to give it to, you simply would use the decimal system because it's intuitively natural to do so. You can break up the day into as many hours as you want. It's arbitrary, really. The same goes for hours, minutes and seconds. However, there is a dedicated number of solar years within the Great Year of precession, and that number happens to be divisible by 60. For the Sumerian savants and their intellectually absorbent successive kingdoms, they must have known this and likely built their math system around it. They certainly studied the stars for centuries. Seeing a long cycle like precession is a given, considering the Greeks used their data to discover it for themselves. In Hamlet's Mill, authors Santillana and von der Schende state that ancient myths have no historical basis, but a cosmological one based on a primitive form of astrology. They recognise the importance of the heliacally rising constellations as markers for the astrological ages and claimed that knowledge of this phenomenon had been known for thousands of years previously. The heliacal rising of a constellation is the rising of the constellation at sunrise on the equinox, essentially. We get a new one every 2,160 years, and we go through the 12 of these until we come full circle. They claim that to understand ancient thinking, it is necessary to understand astrology, not to the modern sun sign or horoscopic astrology, but to the astrology of ancient times, which was the common language then. They go further and state that our knowledge of the dawn of astrology and its relationship to ancient myths and star names is limited to about 2100 BC, during the renaissance of Sumerian culture, instead of being able to examine the real old material on the subject. Author Philip Drummond makes his case that at the time of Abraham, the Amorites first recorded the shift from the age of Taurus to the age of Aries, as represented by the year commencing with the ram, Aries, rather than the bull, Taurus. The book of Joshua indicates that by the time of Moses, the equinoxes had already shifted from Taurus, Aries, as Moses had ordained that the civil year should commence with the month of Nisan, Aries, rather than the month of Taurus. The Feast of Passover is probably a celebration of the age of Aries, with a paschal lamb representative of Aries, traditionally associated with a symbol of the ram or sheep. The Sumerians weren't all science either. In the arts they created a rich legacy of literature, 3 of which deal with the story of creation, an epic of the flood, very similar in many ways to the biblical story of Noah, and the epic poem of Gilgamesh. Gilgamesh, being 2/3 god and 1/3 man, is the classic hero of Mesopotamian literature, a majestic, powerful figure, pressing the gods in vain for the secret of immortality. It's worth noting that the whole reason Sumerian script was decoded was due to George Smith, who recognised the biblical flood narrative in the Sumerian writing. As for their scripture and architecture, it was so well developed, with their strikingly impressive temples, or ziggurats, dominating the landscape, they really did have it all. The nomadic Amorite tribes, who relentlessly tried to penetrate this region, really couldn't resist having a piece of the intellectual action. Tracing the legacy of the Sumerian savants through each successive culture in the region is made easier as they all pretty much adopt the genius of this Genesis culture. After having taken control, the Amorites adopted many Sumerian cultural ways, just as the Akkadians had done before them. They were assimilated into the existing culture rather than replacing which had been so firmly entrenched for 1,000 years or more. The Amorites were a Semitic people who seem to have emerged from western Mesopotamia, modern-day Syria, at some point prior to the 3rd millennium BCE. In Sumerian, they were known as the Martu or the Tidnum in the Ur III period, in Akkadian by the name of Amaru, and in Egypt as Amar, all of which mean Westerners or those of the West, as does the Hebrew name Amorite. They worshipped their own pantheon of gods with a chief deity named Amaru, also known as Bilusadi, Lord of the Mountains, whose wife, Belit Siri, was Lady of the Desert, which also became a designation for the people as the Akkadians also referred to them as people of Amaru, and to the region of Syria as Amaru. There is no record of what the Amorites called themselves. The god Amaru's associations with the mountains, and his wife with the desert, suggest that they may have originated in the area of Syria, around Mount Hermon, but this is unsubstantiated. Their origins are unknown, and their precise history, until they settled in cities like Mari, Ebla and Babylon, is equally mysterious. The idea that the Amorites were giants is supported by the report of the spies who Moses sent through the land of Canaan. The Amorites were one of the people groups they saw, Numbers 13:29, and they claimed that all the people whom we saw in it are men of great stature, Numbers 13:32. from their first appearance in the historical record, the Amorites had a profound impact on the history of Mesopotamia and are probably best known for their kingdom of Babylonia under the Amorite king Hammurabi. The span between 2000 and 1600 BCE in Mesopotamia is known as the Amorite period, during which their impact on the region can most clearly be discerned, but there is no doubt that they influenced the people of the various cities long before that time, and their impact was felt long after. In search of the origins of the Sumerians, it is a process of gathering data on the individual cultures who interacted, interbred, conquered, and inevitably fused into one. The fusion of Ubaid, the Sumerians, and the Amorites are essentially the recipe that one must distill to single out who these people were. The Amorites first appear in history as nomads, who regularly made incursions from the west into established territories and kingdoms. The Amorites were semi-nomadic groups from northern Syria, whom Babylonian literature described in extremely negative terms. The Amorite, he is dressed in sheepskins. He lives in tents in wind and rain. He doesn't offer sacrifices. Armed vagabond in the steppe, he digs up truffles and is restless. He eats raw meat, lives his life without a home, and when he dies, he is not buried according to proper rituals. The bizarre element is that if you read this negative Babylonian opinion of the Amorites, you would think that they would be the last people to preserve science, literature, astronomy, or astrology. However, the Amorites may have simply inherited the knowledge of the Sumerians, preserved it for their own motives. Misusing science and technology has never ceased to this day. It is likely that astronomical omens attributed to their math calculations of heavenly bodies was done under duress. You don't simply wake up one day, decide to invent calculus to deliver omens about your god Marduk. There is a corruption in the scientific motives somewhere. You develop the science, the math, and then you see what use it can be put to. The motive of the Amorites was likely one of control of the population, and likely far removed from the original Sumerian astronomers. A notable example of this is the Enuma Anu Enlil, a major series of 68 or 70 tablets, depending on the recension, dealing with Babylonian astrology. The series was probably compiled in its canonical form during the Kassite period, 1595 to 1157 BCE, but there was certainly some form of prototype Enuma Anu Enlil current in the Old Babylonian Amorite period, 1950 to 1595 BCE. It continued in use well into the first millennium, the latest datable copy being written in 194 BCE. It is believed that the first 49 tablets were transmitted to India in just 4th or 3rd centuries BCE, and that the final tablets dealing with the stars had also arrived in India just before the start of the Common Era. There was a remarkable preservation process happening lasting centuries. The term Amorite may not have originally referred to a specific ethnic group, but to any nomadic people who threatened the stability of established communities. Even if this is so, at some point Amorite came to designate a certain tribe of people with a specific culture based on a nomadic lifestyle of living off the land and taking what was needed from the communities they encountered. They grew more powerful as they acquired more land, until finally they directly threatened the stability of those in the established cities of the region. This situation came to crisis during the latter part of the Ur-III period, also known as the Sumerian Renaissance, 2047 to 1750 BCE. King Shuli of the Sumerian city of Ur constructed a wall, 155 miles, 250 kilometers long, specifically to keep the Amorites out of Sumer. The wall was too long to be properly manned, however, and also presented the problem of not being anchored at either end to any kind of obstacle. An invading force could simply walk around the wall to bypass it, and that seems to be precisely what the Amorites did. Amorite incursions led to the weakening of Ur and Sumer, which encouraged the region of Elam to mount an invasion and break through the wall. The sack of Ur by the Elamites in 1750 BCE ended Sumerian civilization, but this was made possible by the earlier incursions of the Amorites and their migrations throughout the region, which undermined the stability and trade of the cities. Following the sack of Ur in 1750 BCE, the Amorites merged with the Sumerian population in southern Mesopotamia. They had already been established in the cities of Mari and Ebla in Syria, and had ruled in Babylon since circa 1984 BCE. The Amorite king Sin-Muballit had assumed the throne in Babylon in 1812 BCE. He was succeeded by his son Hammurabi, who is better known by his Akkadian name Hammurabi. The fact that an Amorite king ruled in Babylon prior to the fall of Ur supports the claim that not all Amorites were Amorites, and that, as previously mentioned, the term was used rather loosely to refer to any nomadic tribe in the Near East. The Amorites of Babylon seem to have been regarded positively in the region, while the roaming Amorites continue to be a source of instability. The Amorites of Babylon, just as those who inhabited other cities, worshipped Sumerian gods and wrote down Sumerian myths and legends. The only thing we can say for sure on the origins of the Sumerians is that there are trails of evidence. Their science was extremely high at the very beginning of their appearance in Sumer. The Ubaid and Amorites have equally mysterious origins and, at times, difficult to separate. Amazingly, there are over 1 million cuneiform tablets discovered to date, the majority are waiting to be translated. There are undoubtedly answers in them, waiting to be discovered.